Imagine this. You're a college student, eager to start your academic journey, excited about making new friends, and ready to embrace independence. But in your search for a place to stay, you come across a seemingly harmless, budget-friendly student hostel, conveniently close to campus. The pictures look decent, the price is perfect, and you don't think twice. You pack your bags, ready to start your new chapter. What could go wrong? Well, everything. The stories you're about to hear aren't just urban legends. They're real accounts from students who lived through terrifying experiences in the most unexpected of places, their own hostels. Places that should have been safe havens for studying and socializing turned into stages for horrors they couldn't escape. From a roommate with a sinister secret, to the eerie disappearance of a friendly neighbor, and even a shared bathroom that had chilling truths. These are stories that will make you think twice about where you lay your head at night. Each of these tales comes straight from those who lived through them. Students like you and me, whose lives were forever changed by the things they witnessed. Things that can't always be explained. Things that might still haunt them today. So, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. Because once you hear these stories, you may never look at your dorm room the same way again. This is the darker side of student life, where ordinary routines collide with the extraordinary and the terrifying. Story 1. The Silent Roommate. Tariq begins narrating in a calm but slightly ominous tone, setting the stage for the events that follow. When you're a college student on a tight budget, you don't get to be picky. That's what I kept telling myself as I scrolled through CRAIGLIST, looking for a place to stay. My classes were starting in 2 weeks, and my dream of moving closer to campus was quickly turning into a nightmare. Everything was either too expensive, too far away, or already taken. And then I saw it, a student hostel that was both affordable and just a 10-minute walk from my classes. The ad had a few photos. It didn't look fancy, but it looked decent enough, and the price was perfect. Maybe if I hadn't been so desperate, I would have paid more attention to the warning signs. But at the time, it seemed like a lifesaver. I emailed the contact on the ad, and by the next day, I was moving into my new home. Or what I thought would be my new home. The building itself was old. You could tell it had been around for decades, maybe even longer. The paint on the walls was faded. The hallways had a musty smell, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. But it wasn't all bad. It had a cozy common area where students hung out, and the rooms were small but functional. There was a mix of students from different backgrounds, which I thought was cool. Everyone seemed nice enough, and for the first day or two, I actually felt relieved. I thought I'd found the perfect place to start my semester. I was wrong. I met my roommate Jeremy on my first night. Or rather, I saw him. He didn't say much. In fact, he didn't say anything at all. When I walked into the room, he was sitting at his desk with his back to me, wearing headphones. I introduced myself, but he didn't respond. I figured he didn't hear me, so I just set my stuff down and unpacked quietly. After a while, he turned around, nodded at me, and mumbled, "Hi." That was it. No name, no small talk, just hi. Jeremy was different. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was barely above a whisper. He avoided eye contact and kept to himself most of the time. He had this habit of leaving the door to our room slightly ajar, even when he was inside. At first, I thought he was just shy, maybe introverted. I tried to be friendly, but he didn't seem interested. After a few days, I gave up and figured we'd just coexist without really interacting. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jeremy had this old speaker that he used to play music late at night. It wasn't loud, but the music itself was strange. It was this eerie, soft instrumental music that sounded like it belonged in a horror movie. It would play for hours, and even when I put in my headphones to drown it out, I could still hear it faintly in the background. It made it hard to sleep, but I didn't want to start an argument. After all, I just moved in. I didn't want to be that roommate. It wasn't long before I started noticing how the other residents reacted to Jeremy. Whenever he walked into the common area, conversations would stop and people would glance at him nervously. If he sat down, the others would find excuses to leave. At first, I thought it was just college gossip. Maybe he was socially awkward or had a bad reputation. But the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just awkwardness. It was fear. They were afraid of him. And yet, no one said anything to me about it. No warnings, no advice, just uneasy glances and forced smiles when I asked about him. It was like they didn't want to talk about him at all. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe they were being dramatic. Or maybe Jeremy just preferred to be left alone. I mean, we were all here for the same reason, to focus on school, right? I tried to focus on my classes and ignore the weird vibe in the hostel. But it wasn't long before things started getting strange. Really strange. Little did I know, sharing a room with Jeremy would be the worst decision I'd ever made. And by the time I realized it, it was already too late. Tarek's tone becomes uneasy as the story shifts into the unsettling events that gradually escalate. At first, it was just little things. Things you could almost shrug off. I'd come back from class and find my belongings slightly out of place. A book moved from the desk to my bed, my charger unplugged and coiled neatly on the floor. I thought maybe I'd forgotten where I'd left them. College was stressful, after all. But then, the scratches started showing up. One day, I noticed faint scratch marks on the wall near Jeremy's bed. They were thin, jagged, and seemed to spread out in random directions. At first, I thought it was just wear and tear from the old building, but the next morning, there were more, and then more. Every time I looked, it seemed like the scratches were multiplying, getting closer and closer to the shared space between our beds. I didn't have an explanation, and frankly, I didn't want one. Then there were the noises. It started with soft whispers late at night. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone talking just outside our door. I'd get up, open the door, and find nothing. The hall would be empty, silent, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the whispers weren't the worst part. Some nights, I'd hear tapping, light, rhythmic taps on the walls, the floor, even the window. And then there were the footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, right outside our door. I'd lie there, frozen, trying to convince myself it was just another resident. But the footsteps never faded away. They'd stop right in front of my door and linger for what felt like hours. Jeremy's behavior didn't help. He started standing in the common area at odd hours, usually late at night, just staring. He wouldn't be watching TV or scrolling through his phone. He'd just stand there, motionless, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. It was like he wasn't even there. One time, I tried saying something to him, just a casual, "Hey, you okay?" He turned to look at me, but his eyes were empty, like he was looking right through me. He didn't say a word, just turned back and kept staring. I stopped asking after that. By this point, I was starting to lose it. Was I imagining all of this? Was I overthinking everything because of the weird vibe Jeremy gave off? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And then it all came to a head. It happened around 3 a.m. I'd finally managed to fall asleep after hours of tossing and turning. And then I felt it, that strange sensation you get when someone's watching you. I opened my eyes, and there he was, Jeremy, standing at the foot of my bed, staring down at me. He wasn't blinking. His eyes were wide, and his head was tilted slightly to the side. He was so still, I could barely see him breathing. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the longer I stared, the more real it became. I whispered, "Jeremy, what are you doing?" And then he spoke. His voice was soft, almost robotic, and he said, "I was just checking, making sure everything was safe." Safe? What the hell did that even mean? I sat up, my heart pounding, and said, "What are you talking about? Why are you standing there?" But Jeremy didn't answer. He just smiled this strange, unsettling smile and said, You shouldn't worry so much." Then he turned around and calmly walked back to his bed, lay down, and pulled the covers over himself like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat there, watching him, waiting for him to do something else. But he didn't move. He just lay there, perfectly still, while I sat in the dark, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The next morning, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my things and went straight to the hostel manager's office. I told him I wanted to move out immediately. When he asked why, I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid or crazy, but I finally said, "It's my roommate. There's something wrong with him." The manager's face went pale. He sighed and said, "I was afraid of this." That's when he told me the truth. Jeremy wasn't just any student. He'd been evicted from the hostel a year ago after several incidents of violent behavior. Apparently, he'd threatened another resident and had to be removed. But he came back a few months later, begging for a second chance. The manager reluctantly let him stay on the condition that he didn't cause any more trouble. I guess I was the unlucky one who ended up sharing a room with him. I left the hostel that day and never looked back. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed, and honestly, I don't want to know. But if there's one thing I learned, it's this: never ignore red flags. Do your research, trust your instincts, and if something feels off, don't stick around to find out why. Your safety is worth more than a cheap place to stay. As for Jeremy, I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he's still there, in that same room, playing his haunting music and staring into space. Or maybe he's found someone new to watch. Story 2, The Vanishing Neighbor. My name's Tommy, and this story still makes my skin crawl. I was a wide-eyed freshman, excited to start my college journey. Like most students, I was on a tight budget and needed a place to stay near campus. That's how I ended up on CRAIGLIST, scrolling through endless ads until I found it. A shared student hostel that was cheap, close to campus, and even had a few decent reviews. It seemed perfect, or so I thought. The place wasn't bad. It had this cozy vibe despite being a little worn down. Faded paint, creaky stairs, and mismatched furniture. But it felt alive, buzzing with the energy of students from all over. My room was small but functional, and the other residents seemed nice enough. It didn't take long before I settled in and started to feel at home. But looking back, I should have paid more attention to the little things. The faint unease that lingered in the halls, the way some residents avoided certain rooms, and the unsettling stories they refused to share. If I had, maybe I wouldn't have ended up in the middle of something I'll never forget. My neighbor, Tarek, was one of the first people I met there. He seemed nice, quiet but polite, always giving a quick nod when we passed in the hall. Over time, we started talking. He was older than me, a little reserved, but easy to get along with. I didn't know much about him at first, except that he'd been living there longer than most of the other residents. Tarek wasn't just friendly, he was also paranoid. At least, that's what I thought at the time. He'd often mentioned feeling like someone was watching him in his room. He said he'd wake up at night with this heavy feeling, like there was someone standing over him. He swore that things in his room were being moved around, books, clothes, even his toothbrush. I tried to brush it off, thinking he was just stressed or maybe even imagining things. One night, we were sitting in a common area, and Tarek said something that sent a shiver down my spine. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Have you ever woken up and felt like you weren't alone? Like someone was watching you, but when you looked, no one was there?" I laughed it off, trying to make light of it, but the look on his face told me he wasn't joking. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. It wasn't long before I started noticing things too. At first, it was subtle, just little oddities that didn't make sense. I'd come back to my room and find the door unlocked, even though I was sure I'd locked it. My backpack, which I always left by the desk, would be on my bed. Small stuff, easy to dismiss. But then, it started getting weirder. Some nights, I'd hear noises in the hallway. Soft footsteps, faint whispers, and once, what sounded like someone scratching at the walls. I'd open my door to check, but the hall would be empty, eerily silent. Other times, I'd catch fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there'd be nothing there. It felt like the building itself was alive, breathing and watching. Tariq's paranoia only got worse. He started keeping his door locked all the time, even when he was inside. He stopped hanging out in the common area and barely spoke to anyone. One day, I asked him if he was okay, and he just muttered, "They're coming into my room. I know they are." When I asked who they were, he just shook his head and said, "You wouldn't believe me." The story takes a darker turn when Tommy discovers Tariq's disappearance. Then, one morning, Tariq was gone. His door was wide open, his room completely empty. At first, I thought he'd just moved out, but when I asked the manager, he seemed nervous. He said Tariq had left suddenly, in the middle of the night, without saying a word to anyone. That didn't sit right with me. Tariq wouldn't just leave like that. Not without at least saying goodbye. Later that day, I went into Tariq's room. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The room was bare, except for one thing, a notebook lying on the floor. I picked it up and started flipping through it. At first, it was just random notes, class schedules, to-do lists, but then I found the last few pages and my blood ran cold. They were filled with frantic scribbles, sentences that didn't make sense. They're watching me. The shadows are moving again. I can hear them breathing. And then the last line, written over and over, like a mantra. Don't let them in. Don't let them in. Don't let them in. I never saw Tariq again. To this day, I don't know what happened to him. The manager claimed he left on his own, but I can't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe Tariq was right. Maybe there was something in that hostel, something we couldn't see but could definitely feel. Whatever it was, I'm just glad I got out of there. So if you're ever looking for a place to stay, do yourself a favor. Don't trust everything you read online. Sometimes, the things that seem too good to be true are hiding nightmares you can't even imagine. One morning, I woke up, stretching out of bed, thinking it was just another normal day. Classes were getting busier, and I had a stack of homework to catch up on. But then something fell off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the feeling stayed with me as I made my way to the kitchen. Tariq hadn't shown up for class that morning. It wasn't unusual for him to be a little late, but this time, there was no sign of him. His absence lingered in the air, a gnawing uncertainty I couldn't shake. I knew something was wrong. I decided to head to his room to check on him. As I walked past his door, I noticed something that sent a chill up my spine. The door was slightly ajar. Usually, Tariq kept his door closed and locked. The fact that it was open just a crack made me uneasy. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to knock. Something told me I should leave it alone, but my curiosity got the better of me. I called out his name softly. Tariq. There was no response. I pushed the door open cautiously, feeling an unease that I couldn't explain. The room was eerily still, and the moment I stepped inside, it felt like time had frozen. Everything seemed untouched. His clothes were neatly folded on the chair, his laptop still open on the desk, and his bed was made, not a single item out of place. But there was one thing that struck me as particularly unsettling. There was no sign of Tariq. It was as though he had just vanished. There were no personal items scattered around, no sign of a hasty exit, just an empty room. My mind raced, but I tried to push away the feeling of panic rising in my chest. Maybe he went out and forgot to lock the door, or maybe he just left early for class. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the dread settling over me. I stood in the middle of his room, my heart beating faster with every passing second. It was like he had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. I turned to leave, but before I could, I heard someone approaching in the hall. It was one of the other residents, Sarah. She glanced at me, saw my worried expression, and asked, "Is everything okay?" I nodded, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, just checking on Tarek. He hasn't been to class today, and his door's open." Sarah gave me a blank look. "Oh, don't worry about him. He probably just skipped today. Happens all the time." Her response didn't sit right with me. I could tell she was trying to downplay it, but the way she quickly turned and walked away made me uneasy. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't shake the strange feeling that Tarek was still there, even though I knew he wasn't. His absence haunted me, and I couldn't stop wondering what had happened to him. The other residents didn't seem concerned, though. They acted like it was just another one of those things that happened at the hostel. But I wasn't so sure. Then came the night when everything changed. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to a faint sound from down the hall. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the old pipes creaking. But then I heard it again, scratching. Slow, deliberate scraping noises, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. The sound came from Tarek's room. I tried to ignore it, but the noises only grew louder. It sounded like someone or something was trying to claw their way out of the walls. The scratching was followed by muffled whispers, faint and unintelligible. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the building settling. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing in the hall, stopping at Tarek's door. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I had to check it out. I grabbed my phone, texting a few of the other residents to see if they heard the noises too. No response. Maybe they were all asleep. I hesitated, but the curiosity burned inside me. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept down the hallway toward Tarek's room. The door was wide open, just like the night I first checked on him. I pushed the door open, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. The walls were covered in deep scratch marks, jagged lines running up and down, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The desk had been overturned, but that wasn't the worst part. There, carved into the surface of the desk, was a message. "Help me." I stared at it, unable to move. My body felt like it was paralyzed. It was as though the words had been written just for me, a desperate cry for help that I couldn't ignore. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly backed out of the room. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen, but I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just the scratches or the message. It was the feeling in the air. Something or someone was still in that room, watching me. I hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered something that should have stayed buried. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to report what happened to anyone. I made my way to the manager's office, but when I arrived, I was met with an unexpected response. "Don't worry about it, Tommy. You know how things are around here. Students come and go all the time." I was stunned. The manager wasn't taking me seriously. The dismissal in their voice only added to the dread building in my chest. I left the office feeling helpless. Later that week, I decided to call the authorities. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just let it go. A detective arrived at the hostel, and I explained everything that had happened. The noises, the scratches, the message on the desk. He listened carefully, but there was a strange look in his eyes. After a long pause, he finally said, "You're not the first to report something like this. The hostels had a history of students going missing over the years, but no one's ever been able to figure out what's going on. It's as if they just disappear." My heart sank as I realized the truth. I wasn't the first person to be involved in something sinister at that hostel. Tarek wasn't the first to vanish. The detective left without offering much hope. He gave me a few comforting words, but I knew better. The truth was out there, buried in the walls of that hostel, and I had narrowly escaped it. That night, I packed my things and left the hostel. I didn't care where I went. just as long as it wasn't there. Looking back, I don't know if it was the building itself or something else that made people disappear. Maybe it was something alive that had been living in those walls for years, feeding off the fear and paranoia of the students who stayed there. But one thing is for sure, I never stayed in a hostel again. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, and that, my friends, is how I survived the terror that many others never escaped. Story 3. The locked bathroom. I had just transferred to a new college, and the financial pressure was mounting. Being a transfer student meant I had to find affordable housing fast, and after browsing Craigslist for hours, I found it. A cheap dormitory near campus with shared bathrooms. The building was large, old, and had that faint smell of mildew in the air, but it was functional and, most importantly, cheap. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cheap. That's all I could afford, I told myself as I signed the lease. The building's long hallways echoed with every step, and the floors creaked beneath my weight. As I lugged my bags to my room, I could hear distant murmurs of voices and laughter. This place was full of students just like me, all trying to survive college on a budget. I settled into my room quickly, unpacking my things and getting used to the idea of living in a shared space. The hallways felt strangely empty, though, and as the evening light dimmed, I couldn't help but feel an odd chill in the air. But that's just what living in an old building felt like, right? Little did I know, this place would be far more unsettling than I had ever imagined. The first couple of days were quiet. I met a few of my neighbors. Jamalu, a quiet guy who kept mostly to himself, and Talu, a more outgoing student who liked to chat about anything and everything. As we passed each other in the halls, they warned me about the dormitory's shared bathrooms. "It's a little weird," Jamalu said one morning, his voice hushed as if sharing a secret. "Sometimes, the lights flicker and the water just turns on by itself. Yeah, and don't go in there after midnight," Talu added, her voice carrying a mix of humor and unease. "There's this sound, like someone crying from the bathroom. Weirdest thing I've ever heard." I laughed it off, thinking it was just dorm gossip, part of the typical scare the new kid routine. After all, I'd been living in old buildings for years. A few creaky pipes and flickering lights weren't going to bother me. Still, something about their tone made me uneasy, but I didn't think too much of it. I was just settling in, adjusting to my new life. It wasn't until a couple of nights later, when I was walking to the bathroom, that things started to feel off. It was a Friday night, and after a long day of classes, I decided to take a quick shower before heading to bed. I grabbed my towel and shampoo and made my way down the hallway toward the shared bathrooms. The lights in the hallway flickered as I walked, casting shadows on the worn-out walls. The building groaned, its age evident in the way it seemed to breathe with every gust of wind. When I reached the bathroom door, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, which wasn't typical. The bathrooms were always locked unless someone was inside, and I hadn't seen anyone walk out. Hesitating, I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the bathroom was empty, nothing out of the ordinary. I felt a brief relief, but then, as I reached for the light switch, I heard a faint whisper. It was soft, like a person trying to stay quiet. I froze, my hand hovering above the light switch. The sound was coming from one of the stalls, but no one was there. I turned the light on, the harsh brightness filling the space, and the whispering stopped immediately. I quickly finished my shower, not wanting to stay too long, but as I stepped out of the bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. As the days went on, I couldn't help but notice more odd occurrences. The lights in the hallway continued to flicker, but now, I began to hear strange noises late at night, like footsteps coming from the bathroom. I'd wake up, heart pounding, and strain to listen. The sound of shuffling footsteps, followed by an eerie silence. One night, I was returning from the common room when I passed by the bathroom. The door was wide open again, but this time, the cold draft coming from inside was almost unbearable. My skin prickled, and I couldn't help but glance inside. The bathroom was empty, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. The air felt heavier, as if something was lurking just beyond my vision. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But when I asked Jamalu and Tolu about it, they both seemed strangely uneasy. Yeah, sometimes I feel like someone's in there, even when no one's around, Jamalu admitted one evening, his voice low. It's the water. Sometimes it just runs on its own, like someone's using the sink. I laughed it off. Old pipes, right? But the more I thought about it, the less I believed that excuse. There was something about the bathroom, something about the way it always seemed to be, waiting. Then the unthinkable happened. One evening, after hearing more noises coming from the bathroom, I went to investigate. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but the mystery had gotten under my skin. The bathroom door was locked. I hadn't seen anyone go in there, and yet it was firmly shut. I knocked on the door, but there was no response. I stepped back, staring at the door, and that's when I saw it. A small crack in the wood, a sliver of light coming through. My heart raced. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out what to do. The hallway was eerily quiet. No one else was around. Suddenly, the door creaked open slightly, as if something or someone was trying to push it open. I quickly pulled away, my pulse quickening. I was about to walk away when I heard it. A faint sound crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from inside the bathroom. I turned and rushed down the hall to Tolu's room. "Did you hear that?" I asked, out of breath. Tolu looked at me, her expression uneasy. "You heard it too?" she whispered. "It's been happening for days." I thought I was the only one. I told her what I'd heard. The crying, the door opening by itself. She nodded grimly. "It's the bathroom. No one talks about it, but people have heard things. Whispers, crying, and even scratching. Some say it's just the old plumbing, but I think something's wrong." I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my mind. That night, unable to shake the unease, I returned to the bathroom. The door was still locked. This time, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I knocked once again, harder this time. When there was no answer, I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I stepped inside, the lights flickering above me, casting long shadows against the walls. The bathroom was empty, but the air felt thick, oppressive. The cold draft from earlier was stronger now, and I could hear it. The faint sound of crying, just barely audible. I moved towards the last stall, where I heard the noise coming from. As I got closer, I froze. There on the wall was something scrawled in faded red ink. "Help me." A chill ran down my spine. I backed away quickly, my breath shallow, and stumbled out of the bathroom. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew one thing for sure. This place was haunted. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I packed my bags and left the dormitory, telling the manager I was moving out. They didn't ask any questions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something was wrong. As I left, Tolu caught up with me. "Are you sure you're leaving?" she asked, her face pale. "Some people never leave." I shuddered but nodded. "I think I'm done with this place." I later learned from a former resident that the dormitory had a dark history. Years ago, a student had gone missing after reporting strange occurrences in the bathroom. No one ever found out what happened to them, and soon the rumors started. The bathroom was cursed, haunted by the spirit of the missing student. I didn't stick around long enough to confirm the stories. I just knew one thing: trust your instincts and never ignore the signs. The bathroom might have been locked, but the past was still there, waiting. It had been a long day. I'd stayed up late studying, then had to run a few errands around campus before finally making my way back to the dormitory. By the time I got to the building, it was well past midnight. The hallways were dark and eerily silent, save for the occasional sound of creaking floorboards. I wasn't tired, but I was exhausted from the day, and all I wanted was a hot shower before bed. The bathroom lights flickered as I walked down the long hallway. I pushed open the door and immediately noticed the cool air inside, almost unnaturally cold. It was one of those old, musty bathrooms. The kind that always felt a little too damp, a little too dark, no matter how many lights you turned on. As I stepped into one of the stalls, I could hear the sound of the shower head spitting water, almost as if it was reluctant to start. It was one of those awkward moments when you know something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. The water finally ran, and I let out a breath, stepping in to wash away the lingering tension of the day. That's when it happened. A loud bang echoed through the bathroom, making the walls tremble. It sounded like someone had slammed their fist against the door of the bathroom. I jumped, the water sloshing over the side of the stall. My heart raced, but I froze, listening intently. The first thought that crossed my mind was that someone had been playing a prank, maybe Tolu or Jamalu, looking to freak me out after hearing the rumors about this place. But then it came. A faint whisper, almost a hiss. "Don't come out." I froze, my body tense. The words echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. The bathroom door was locked. There was no way anyone could have gotten it right. The banging stopped, but the whispering continued, so soft, yet piercing, as if the voice was right behind me. I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. "It's just a prank," I whispered to myself, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The lights above me flickered, once, twice, and then dimmed. The air grew colder. I could see my breath now, swirling in the faint light. I stood in the stall, heart pounding, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe someone had snuck in through the vents. Maybe the plumbing was just acting up. Maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. But then, the banging started again. Louder this time. It reverberated against the walls, and I flinched, my muscles seizing in fear. The whispering grew louder too, as though whatever, or whoever, was in there with me was getting closer. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the lock on the stall, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite explain. I had to get out. I had to get out of there right now. But the door of the bathroom seemed miles away. The whispering, the banging, it was all around me, suffocating. My breath came in short gasps. In a sudden burst of panic, I locked myself in a stall, pressing myself against the cold, tiled wall. My heart was thundering in my chest. Sweat ran down my back despite the chill in the room. It felt like someone or something was standing right outside the stall, watching me, waiting. The banging on the door intensified. The lights flickered violently, casting eerie shadows on the bathroom walls. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound. The whispers continued, now louder and more distinct. They were all I could hear, except for the pounding of my own pulse. And then silence. The bathroom was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, the kind of silence that only happens when something is terribly, terribly wrong. I waited for what felt like hours, but the silence held firm, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. My mind raced. What was going on? Was someone playing a trick on me? Or had something truly sinister happened here? The thought of leaving the stall crossed my mind, but every inch of my body screamed at me to stay put. I didn't know what was waiting for me outside, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I don't know how much time passed. Minutes, hours? It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. But eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the panic, the uncertainty. It was too much. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I slowly pushed the door open, praying I wouldn't hear that banging again. The air felt thick, charged with tension. I stepped out of the stall, my legs shaky beneath me. The lights flickered once more, casting long, erratic shadows across the floor. The bathroom door was wide open. The hallway beyond seemed empty. I rushed out, almost tripping over my own feet. The cold draft hit me immediately, as I crossed the threshold into the hallway. My heart pounded as I glanced around, half expecting someone or something to jump out at me from the shadows. But the hallway was empty. The building, as always, was eerily silent. I walked quickly, but my footsteps echoed unnervingly loud against the cold, bare floor. When I reached my room, my stomach twisted. The door was slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks, feeling my breath catch in my throat. I didn't know why, but the sight of the door left me paralyzed. Someone had been in my room while I was in the bathroom. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't left the door open when I'd gone to take my shower. So how? My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open, my heart in my throat. The room was a mess. It wasn't much, just a few books scattered across the desk and a lamp knocked over. But everything was wrong. The way the chair was tilted at an odd angle, the sheets twisted on my bed. It felt like someone had gone through every single thing, turning it all upside down. I didn't stop to check the rest of the room. I didn't need to. I grabbed my things as quickly as I could, throwing them into my bag with shaky hands. There was no way I was staying another night here. I didn't know who or what was in the building with me, but I didn't want to find out. I couldn't. Without thinking twice, I ran down the stairs and out into the parking lot. I drove straight to my car and spent the rest of the night there, the fear and adrenaline still coursing through my body. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my eyes darting nervously toward the dormitory building in the distance. The shadows outside seemed to move, to shift, and I couldn't help but wonder if someone was watching me from the windows above. The next morning, I returned to the hostel in a daze, still shaking from the events of the night before. I went straight to the manager's office, hoping for some explanation. I was in the bathroom last night, I told them, my voice cracking. Something happened. Someone was in my room. The manager just stared at me, unblinking. A misunderstanding, they said dismissively. You were probably just hearing things. The plumbing's old and the building creaks. There's nothing to worry about. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My throat tightened. Nothing to worry about. I left the office in a daze and went straight to the local library, desperate for answers. It was there in the dusty corners of an old news article that I found it. A student who had gone missing years ago. They had lived in the same building, and the last place they were seen was the bathroom. The article didn't give many details, but what struck me was the chilling end. The student had died under mysterious circumstances in that very bathroom. They had been alone when it happened, locked in the stall, their body found the next morning. But no one ever figured out what truly happened. I didn't need to read more. The connection was clear. I packed my bags immediately and never looked back. I didn't trust that place, and I sure didn't trust the manager's dismissive attitude. Some things are better left unexplored, and as much as I wanted to finish my stay, I realized my safety had to come first. I never returned to that dormitory, but I left with something far more valuable than any lesson I could have learned in that building. The understanding that sometimes trusting your instincts is the most important thing you can do. So, if you find yourself in a place that feels wrong, if something seems off, listen to that feeling. Trust your gut, because you never know what might be lurking just around the corner. This version creates an atmosphere of dread and keeps the tension high, while providing a satisfying resolution that ties everything together. It also serves as a reminder to always listen to one's instincts in unsettling situations. Would you like to adjust any part of the story, or does it work for you? Well, there you have it. 3 spine-chilling stories from the depths of college life, filled with unexplained incidents, eerie encounters, and unsettling experiences. These tales might just make you look over your shoulder the next time you hear a creak in the hallway or spot a shadow in the corner of your room. But here's the big question. Have any of you experienced something like this while you were in college, or even now? Have you ever heard strange noises, felt an unsettling presence, or maybe even stumbled upon a mystery that seemed too dark to explain? The manager just stared at me, unblinking. We'd love to hear your misunderstanding. Drop a comment below and you were probably just hearing things. Did you ever trust your instincts when something building creaks? Or did you brush it off? Worry about. How did it turn out? I could feel the blood drain from my face. If you enjoyed these creepy college tales, nothing to want to hear about, more stories that I left the office in a daze and went straight to the local library and hit that notification desperate for answers. There's always more mystery waiting to be uncovered. Old news article, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. A student had gone missing years ago. Until next time. They had lived in the same building, stay curious, and the last place they were seen remember to always trust your instincts. The article didn't comment give many details, and let's keep the conversation chilling end. We'll be reading every one of your comments under mysterious and sharing more of these spine-tingling stories soon. They had been alone when it happened, locked in the stall, their body found the next morning. But no one ever figured out what truly happened. I didn't need to read more. The connection was clear. I packed my bags immediately and never looked back. I didn't trust that place, and I sure didn't trust the manager's dismissive attitude. Some things are better left unexplored, and as much as I wanted to finish my stay, I realized my safety had to come first. I never returned to that dormitory, but I left with something far more valuable than any lesson I could have learned in that building. The understanding that sometimes trusting your instincts is the most important thing you can do. So, if you find yourself in a place that feels wrong, if something seems off, listen to that feeling. Trust your gut, because you never know what might be lurking just around the corner. This version creates an atmosphere of dread and keeps the tension high, while providing a satisfying resolution that ties everything together. It also serves as a reminder to always listen to one's instincts in unsettling situations. Would you like to adjust any part of the story, or does it work for you? Well, there you have it. 3 spine-chilling stories from the depths of college life, filled with unexplained incidents, eerie encounters, and unsettling experiences. These tales might just make you look over your shoulder the next time you hear a creak in the hallway or spot a shadow in the corner of your room. But here's the big question. Have any of you experienced something like this while you were in college, or even now? Have you ever heard strange noises, felt an unsettling presence, or maybe even stumbled upon a mystery that seemed too dark to explain? We'd love to hear your stories. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. Did you ever trust your instincts when something didn't feel right? Or did you brush it off? How'd it turn out? We want to know. If you enjoyed these creepy college tales and want to hear more stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There's always more mystery waiting to be uncovered, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. So, until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your instincts. Comment below, and let's keep the conversation going. We'll be reading every one of your comments and sharing more of these spine-tingling stories soon.